The heavy steel tracks of a massive bulldozer crushed the wooden gates of a peaceful animal rescue, sending terrified rescue dogs into a panic. A young widow named Emma fell to her knees in the dirt, begging the demolition crew to stop. But the billionaire developer standing over her did not care. He had bribed the corrupt city officials to destroy her life, just so he could build a luxury resort for the elite. And then, he made the ultimate mistake. He stepped his expensive leather shoe directly onto a fallen bronze memorial plaque belonging to Emma's late husband, a decorated military veteran and a legendary Hells Angels road captain. He ground the sacred emblem into the wet mud, laughing at her silent tears, calling her husband's legacy trash. The arrogant billionaire thought he had won. He thought he was untouchable. But what happens next will leave the entire country speechless. This is Heart Tales. Now, let us find out exactly what happened that day. The heavy wooden doors of the clubhouse were closed tight. Inside, the air was thick with a dangerous, suffocating tension. 50 men, all wearing heavy leather vests adorned with the winged skull patch, stood in complete and utter silence. The only sound in the dim room was the faint hum of the ceiling fan, and the steady, heavy breathing of men trying to contain their absolute fury. They had all seen the video. They had all watched Arthur Vance grind his expensive shoe into the sacred bronze memorial of their fallen brother David. A younger member named Caleb, his arms covered in thick ink, could not hold it in any longer. He violently slammed his fist against the solid oak bar. "We need to ride out right now, John," Caleb growled, his voice trembling with pure rage. That arrogant suit just insulted David's memory. He spat on this entire club. "Tell me we are riding to his mountain right now. Tell me we are going to burn those bulldozers to the ground." A low murmur of agreement swept through the room. The men shifted their weight, ready to unleash hell. They were just waiting for their president to give the order. Big John Sterling stood up from his chair. He was a man who commanded respect without ever having to raise his voice. He walked slowly to the center of the room, looking into the eyes of his men. "If we ride up there tonight and burn his machines," Big John said, his voice deep, gravelly, and entirely calm, "Arthur Vance wins. That is exactly what he wants us to do." Caleb frowned, his fists still clenched tight. "How does letting him get away with it mean we win?" "Think about it," Big John replied, pointing a thick finger toward the tablet on the bar. "Vance has the local police on his payroll. He has the judges in his pocket. If we throw a single punch, if we break a single window, we give the media the exact story they are looking for. They will call us violent thugs. They will throw us in prison, and Vance will get to build his billionaire playground while playing the victim. We are not going to give him that satisfaction." The room fell silent again as the men absorbed the cold, hard truth of their leader's words. "Arthur Vance thinks power is about money," Big John continued, a sharp, strategic light flashing in his tired eyes. "He thinks his wealth makes him untouchable. But fire burns out quickly, my brothers. We are not going to start a fire. We are going to build an immovable wall. And we are going to crush his empire using the very laws he thinks he is above." Big John walked over to a large map pinned to the clubhouse wall. It was a topographical map of the Oakhaven Mountains. He tapped his finger heavily on a single, winding red line. "This coming Saturday morning," Big John explained, "Arthur Vance is hosting the grand opening of the Vance Global Resort. He is expecting state senators, international investors, and global news networks. He wants to show the world his pristine, untouchable paradise." Big John traced the red line with his finger. "But look at the geography. Because he bought land deep in the mountains to keep normal people out, there is only one way up to his resort, Oakhaven Pass. It is a steep, winding, two-lane mountain highway with absolutely zero shoulders and no alternative routes." A slow, understanding smile began to spread across Caleb's face. "And according to Colorado state agricultural transport laws," Big John said, his voice dropping into a tone of absolute authority, "any vehicle transporting injured or large livestock on a mountain pass is legally required to travel at a maximum speed of 10 miles per hour for the safety of the animals. No other vehicle is legally permitted to pass them on a solid double yellow line." The genius of the plan hit the room like a shockwave. Emma has dozens of rescue dogs and retired police horses that need a safe transport out of that construction zone, Big John announced. So we are going to give her a charity escort. We are going to help her move her animals safely. And we are going to do it on Saturday morning, right when Arthur's billionaire guests are trying to get up that mountain. Big John turned to face his 50 men, his expression turning to solid steel. But 50 bikes are not enough, Big John said. Vance disrespected a fallen veteran. That crosses state lines. That crosses every boundary we have. Big John walked back to the bar and picked up the heavy black telephone. He dialed a number in Nevada. It rang twice before a gruff voice answered. "Brother," Big John said into the receiver. "A billionaire in Colorado just crushed a widow's sanctuary and stepped on the bronze tags of a fallen road captain. I am putting together a charity ride." There was a 3-second pause on the other end of the line. "How many men do you need?" the Nevada president asked. "Bring every man who can ride," Big John answered. "We leave in 1 hour," the voice said. The line clicked dead. For the next 2 hours, Big John stood in that dimly lit room and made calls. He called Texas. He called Arizona. He called Utah. He called New Mexico. He did not have to beg or explain the local politics of Oakhaven. He simply told them that the sacred legacy of a brother had been desecrated by a corrupt billionaire. That was all they needed to hear. When Big John finally set the receiver down, he looked at his local chapter. "Starting tonight, we have brothers riding through the desert from 5 different states," Big John announced, a fierce pride echoing in his chest. "By Friday night, we will have a unified formation of 1,000 riders converging on the Oakhaven city limits." A low murmur of disbelief and awe swept through the room. 1,000 riders. It was not just a club anymore. It was an army. "But here is the absolute law for this operation," Big John commanded, raising his hand to silence the room. "No one brings a weapon. No one drinks a single drop of alcohol. We do not speed. We stop at every single stop sign, and we use our turn signals. We are going to be the most law-abiding citizens this corrupt county has ever seen. If a police officer pulls you over, you say yes, sir, and no, sir. We are going to suffocate Arthur Vance with absolute perfect compliance." The fuse was officially lit. While the biker brotherhood mobilized in the shadows, Arthur Vance was living in blissful ignorance. It was Friday night, exactly 12 hours before the grand opening. Arthur stood on the balcony of his newly finished penthouse suite at the top of the mountain. He was holding a crystal glass of champagne that cost more than $2,000 a bottle. He looked down at the sprawling, illuminated resort below him. It was perfect. The manicured lawns, the glowing hot springs, the massive glass pavilions. He had spent hundreds of millions of dollars building this monument to his own ego. He thought about the widow, Emma, down in the valley. He smirked, taking a sip of his expensive drink. To him, she was just a minor inconvenience that he had easily squashed with his wallet. He had absolutely no idea what was currently happening on the dark highways surrounding his mountain. Under the cover of night, a massive storm of chrome and heavy leather was quietly rolling into Oakhaven. They did not ride in one massive, loud group that would draw police attention. Instead, they rode in small, highly disciplined staggered formations of 5 or 10 bikes. They filled up the local motel parking lots. They camped quietly on the outskirts of the county line. 1,000 engines had gathered in the cold mountain air. 1,000 men, bound by loyalty and an unspoken code of honor, were waiting for the sun to rise. The corrupt politicians of Oakhaven slept soundly in their expensive homes. Arthur Vance slept in his silk sheets, dreaming of the wealth tomorrow would bring. They did not hear the distant, low rumble echoing through the valleys. They did not realize that the consequences of their greed had just arrived, and by the time the sun came up over the Colorado mountains on Saturday morning, it would be far too late to stop it. Saturday morning arrived in the Colorado mountains exactly as Arthur Vance had paid for it to be. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, and the crisp morning air held the promise of an absolutely perfect day. For Arthur, this was not just a weekend. It was the coronation of his corporate empire. Standing on the expansive glass balcony of his penthouse suite, He adjusted the cuffs of his custom Italian shirt. Down below, the Vance Global Resort was a hive of frantic, flawless preparation. Waiters in crisp white uniforms were arranging pyramids of crystal glasses. Chefs were preparing imported caviar. Over 500 bottles of vintage champagne were chilling in sculpted ice baths. The grand opening ceremony was scheduled to begin precisely at 11 in the morning. State senators, tech billionaires, foreign investors, and 3 major national news networks were currently making their way up Oakhaven Pass. Arthur had spent millions of dollars on a marketing campaign that would paint him as a visionary leader. He felt completely, utterly invincible. He did not spare a single thought for the young widow he had left kneeling in the dirt just a few days prior. But down in the valley, exactly at 8 in the morning, the ground began to tremble. It started as a low, thunderous vibration that rattled the windows of the local diner and shook the pine needles from the trees. And then, they appeared. Rolling out from the heavy morning mist, moving in a perfectly synchronized, highly disciplined formation, was a river of chrome, black leather, and roaring steel. 1,000 motorcycles. They rode 2 abreast, staggered perfectly to fill the entire right lane of the highway. The sheer physical presence of 1,000 heavy V-twin engines, moving as one single organism, was terrifyingly beautiful. It was a mechanical symphony of raw power. At the very front of this massive armored column rode Big John Sterling. His face was a mask of absolute focus behind his dark sunglasses. Right behind Big John were 50 heavy pickup trucks pulling wide agricultural trailers. Inside those trailers, looking out with curious eyes, were Emma Hayes's rescue animals. The retired police horses stood calmly in their stalls. The 3-legged military dogs rested on soft beds of hay. Emma herself sat in the passenger seat of the lead truck, her hands pressed against the glass, her eyes wide with a mixture of overwhelming gratitude and awe. She had thought she was entirely alone in the world. Now, she was surrounded by a literal army of 1,000 brothers. As the massive convoy reached the base of Oakhaven Pass, Big John raised his left hand high into the air. He held up one single finger, and then he slowly lowered his arm. Instantly, the command rippled back through the 1,000 riders. Brake lights flashed in a mesmerizing, synchronized wave of bright red. Gears shifted down. The roaring engines settled into a low, rumbling purr. The agricultural transport law of Colorado applied. For the safety of the animals, the convoy dropped their speed to exactly 10 miles per hour. Oakhaven Pass was a winding, steep, 2-lane road. There was 1 lane going up and 1 lane coming down, separated by a solid double yellow line. There were no shoulders. There were no passing lanes. If you were behind the convoy, you were trapped behind the convoy. By 9 in the morning, the trap had perfectly, flawlessly snapped shut. The luxury Blacktown cars, armored SUVs, and sleek exotic sports cars belonging to Arthur's billionaire guests began to pile up behind the wall of motorcycles. The elite drivers honked their horns. They flashed their high beams. The wealthy executives rolled down their tinted windows, screaming at the bikers to move out of the way. But the Hells Angels did not get angry. They did not shout back. They executed their malicious compliance with terrifying politeness. When a furious tech CEO leaned out of his imported sports car and screamed a stream of profanities, a massive biker covered in neck tattoos simply turned around, smiled warmly, and offered a friendly wave. When a squirrel ran across the road, the entire formation executed a completely legal, slow, and safe emergency stop, forcing the line of luxury cars to slam on their brakes. They waited exactly 2 full minutes to ensure the squirrel had safely made it into the woods, before slowly, agonizingly, accelerating back to 10 miles per hour. By 10 in the morning, the traffic jam extended for 7 miles down the mountain. Inside the air-conditioned luxury cars, the panic was beginning to set in. The state senators were missing their scheduled press conferences. The wealthy investors were trapped in gridlock, staring at the exhaust pipes of heavy motorcycles. They could not turn around on the narrow road. They could not pass safely. They were prisoners in their own expensive vehicles. Up at the resort, Arthur Vance paced furiously across the marble floor of his empty grand lobby. The venue was completely deserted. The ice under the champagne was melting, The expensive catering food was sitting untouched. Arthur's face was red with a rage he could barely contain. His cell phone buzzed. It was the local police chief, the same corrupt official Arthur had bribed to ignore the demolition of Emma's sanctuary. Arthur snatched the phone, screaming into the receiver before the chief could even say a word. "Where are my guests?" Arthur roared, the veins bulging in his neck. "There is a massive traffic jam on the pass. I pay you to keep this town clear. Send your cruisers down there. Arrest every single one of those leather-wearing thugs, and clear my road immediately." There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. "Arthur," the police chief said, his voice trembling with genuine fear. "I cannot touch them. My hands are completely tied." "What do you mean you cannot touch them?" Arthur screamed, throwing a crystal glass against the wall, shattering it into 100 pieces. "They are blocking a state highway. Bring out the riot gear. Use tear gas. Do your job." "You are not listening to me, Arthur," the chief yelled back, his own panic finally breaking through. "I have 6 cruisers trailing them right now. My deputies have been looking for any excuse to pull them over for the last 2 hours. But they are not breaking a single law. They are perfectly staggered. They are using their turn signals for every slight curve. They are moving injured livestock, which legally grants them the right to travel at 10 miles per hour. And Arthur, every single one of those 1,000 motorcycles has a camera mounted to their helmet." Arthur froze. The blood drained entirely from his face. "They are live streaming this to the entire internet, Arthur," the police chief continued, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "They are calling it the Iron Heart Animal Charity Ride. If I order my men to unlawfully arrest 1,000 peaceful bikers who are escorting disabled police dogs on a charity mission, it will be the biggest civil rights lawsuit in the history of this state. The governor will have my badge by sunset. I am not going to prison for you." The line went dead. Arthur slowly lowered the phone. His hands were shaking. He walked back out to the glass balcony and looked down toward the valley. Through the clear mountain air, he could see it. It was a scene straight out of his worst nightmare. 3 national news helicopters were circling the mountain pass. But they were not filming his billion-dollar resort. They were broadcasting the spectacular unified formation of 1,000 motorcycles, protecting a convoy of rescue animals. The media anchors were praising the incredible display of brotherhood. They were telling the story of Emma Hayes, the brave young widow, and the beautiful animals she had saved. And simultaneously, they were telling the story of the greedy, corrupt billionaire who had tried to destroy her. Arthur's secure phone rang again. It was a private number. He answered it with a dry throat. "Arthur," a cold, sharp voice spoke. It was the primary investor of Vance Global, a man who controlled billions in equity. "I am currently stuck in the back of a limousine, trapped behind a truck, smelling of horse manure, watching my investment burn to the ground on live television. The public relations department is in full meltdown. Our stock has dropped 12% in the last hour." "I can fix this," Arthur stammered, desperation clawing at his throat. "It is just a temporary blockade. I will—" "Shut up," the investor interrupted, his tone lethal. "You picked a fight with a widow over a piece of dirt, and you brought an army of ghosts to our front door. You have exactly 1 hour to get this road moving, Arthur. If my car does not reach that summit in 60 minutes, I am pulling all funding. I will personally see to it that the board removes you as chief executive officer by Monday morning." The call disconnected, leaving Arthur in absolute, deafening silence. The brass band in the courtyard was awkwardly playing a cheerful tune to rows of empty white chairs. The melted ice dripped slowly onto the pristine floor. Arthur Vance, the man who believed money made him a god, realized he was completely powerless. He could not buy his way out of this. He could not arrest his way out of this. He looked down at his expensive Italian shoes, the same shoes he had used to desecrate the bronze memory of a fallen hero. If he wanted to save his empire, he was going to have to walk down that mountain, and he was going to have to do the one thing he had never done in his entire miserable life. He was going to have to beg for mercy. Dưới đây là phần 4. Phần này sẽ khép lại toàn bộ vòng cung cảm xúc bằng cuộc đi bộ nhục nhã của gã tỷ phú, sự phục hồi phẩm giá cho người quá cố, và một bài học đắt giá về quyền lực thực sự. Tất cả các con số, thời gian và tiền tệ đều đã được viết bằng chữ tiếng Anh tuyệt đối theo đúng yêu cầu của bạn. Văn phòng được thiết kế hoàn hảo cho giọng đọc AI, với những khoảng ngắt nghỉ tự nhiên để đẩy cảm xúc lên mức cao nhất. Part 4. The Walk of Shame and the True Meaning of Power. Arthur Vance stood on the marble floor of his deserted grand lobby, his chest rising and falling in shallow, panicked breaths. For his entire life, Arthur had solved every problem with a checkbook. When people stood in his way, he bought them. When they refused to be bought, he ruined them. But as he looked out through the towering glass windows at the massive, immovable wall of chrome and leather blocking his resort, he realized a terrifying truth. You cannot buy a man who does not care about your money, and you cannot intimidate 1,000 brothers who have ridden through hell and back for each other. His phone buzzed again in his pocket, but he did not answer it. He already knew what it was. It was his board of directors, his investors, his lawyers, all screaming as his multi-billion-dollar empire burned to the ground on live national television. The news helicopters were hovering so low over the mountain that the resort windows vibrated from the chopping of their heavy blades. Arthur had only one option left. He turned around and walked briskly out the back doors of the lobby, heading toward the construction staging area. When his demolition crew had destroyed the sanctuary gates 3 days ago, they had hauled the debris up the mountain in a dump truck to be disposed of. Arthur frantically dug through a massive pile of splintered wood, twisted metal, and dry dirt. His expensive custom suit jacket caught on a rusted nail, tearing the fine Italian wool. He did not care. His manicured hands clawed through the heavy rubble until his fingers brushed against cold, heavy metal. He pulled it out. It was the solid bronze memorial plaque. It was covered in dried mud, and exactly in the center of the winged skull emblem, the imprint of his own expensive leather shoe was still clearly visible. The plaque was incredibly heavy, weighing at least 40 pounds, but Arthur had no choice. He gripped it with both hands and began the long, agonizing walk to the front gates of his property. The distance from the staging area to the main road was roughly half a mile. Arthur Vance was a man who had never walked a mile in his entire adult life, unless it was on a perfectly manicured golf course. The midday sun was beating down relentlessly. Sweat poured down his face, stinging his eyes and soaking his crisp white dress shirt. His arms ached, his muscles screaming under the weight of the solid bronze. But the physical pain was absolutely nothing compared to the psychological torture that awaited him. As Arthur finally approached the main entrance of the Vance Global Resort, he saw the true scale of his defeat. Idling at the very front of the property line was a heavy pickup truck pulling a wide trailer. Inside, the rescue dogs and retired police horses stood calmly, completely unharmed. Sitting in the passenger seat of the truck was Emma Hayes. Standing like a fortress in front of the truck, blocking the entire width of the road, was Big John Sterling. And fanning out behind him, stretching down the winding mountain pass for 7 endless miles, were 1,000 Hell's Angels. Behind the bikers, trapped in a sparkling line of useless metal, were hundreds of luxury cars containing the absolute elite of the corporate world. The wealthy guests were standing outside their vehicles, holding up their expensive smartphones, recording every single second. As Arthur stepped onto the asphalt, a sudden, terrifying silence fell over the mountain. 1,000 motorcycle engines were simultaneously switched off. The sudden absence of the roaring exhaust pipes left a vacuum in the air, filled only by the wind whistling through the pine trees and the hovering news helicopters above. 1,000 men in heavy leather vests crossed their arms and stared directly at Arthur. They did not shout. They did not jeer. They did not throw a single insult. Their silence was infinitely heavier and infinitely more intimidating than any riot could ever be. It was the silence of an army that had already won and did not need to scream to prove its absolute dominance. Arthur stumbled forward, his arms trembling violently as he carried the heavy bronze plaque. He stopped exactly 5 feet away from Big John Sterling and Emma, who had now stepped out of the truck to stand by the club president's side. Arthur was panting, his face pale and drenched in sweat. He held the muddy plaque out, offering it forward with a shaking, desperate grip. "I brought it back," Arthur gasped, his voice cracking, entirely stripped of its usual commanding arrogance. "Here is the memorial. Now please, tell your men to move. My investors are trapped. You are destroying my company." Big John did not take the plaque. He did not even blink. He looked at the trembling billionaire with a mixture of pity and absolute disdain. "We did not ride across 5 states to collect dirty metal, Mr. Vance," Big John said, his deep voice carrying clearly over the silent mountain air. "You disrespected a fallen veteran. You stepped on his legacy. You look at that plaque right now." Arthur swallowed hard and looked down at the bronze medal in his hands. The dried mud and the footprint were still there, covering David's name. "You clean it," Big John commanded quietly. Arthur hesitated. He looked around at the news cameras zoomed in on his face. He looked at the state senators and corporate executives watching him from down the road. "Clean it," Big John repeated. And this time, the tone left absolutely no room for negotiation. Arthur Vance, the chief executive officer of a global empire, slowly lowered the heavy plaque to the asphalt. He dropped to his knees. Having no water and no cloth, he reached down, grabbed the bottom of his $3,000 custom silk tie, and began to aggressively scrub the dried mud off the bronze. When the tie was ruined, he used the sleeve of his tailored wool suit. He scrubbed until his knuckles bled. He scrubbed until the bronze shined brightly in the Colorado sun, revealing the name of the fallen road captain and the proud emblem of the motorcycle club. When it was completely clean, Arthur picked it up and held it out to Emma. Emma did not snatch it. She reached out slowly, with steady, calloused hands, and took the heavy memorial back. She traced her fingers over her late husband's name, holding the bronze tightly to her chest. Then, she looked directly into Arthur Vance's eyes. "You thought this was just a piece of metal," Emma said, her voice calm, yet carrying the profound weight of a woman who had survived the darkest grief. "You thought you could strip my dignity to make yourself look strong, but this plaque belongs to a man who actually knew what strength was. Men who put their lives on the line so you could have the freedom to stand here in your expensive suit. Do not ever disrespect their legacy again." Arthur opened his mouth, but no words came out. There was absolutely nothing left to say. Big John stepped forward, closing the distance between himself and the broken billionaire. "I hope this empty glass building was worth what it cost you, Arthur," Big John said quietly, so only the three of them could hear. "Because power has absolutely nothing to do with bank accounts, or political bribes, or sitting in a corner office. Power is knowing that if you fall, 1,000 brothers will ride through the darkest night to pick you back up. You have no one. You are completely alone." Big John paused, letting the devastating truth sink in. "Now apologize to her," Big John ordered, loudly. Arthur turned to Emma. The cameras were recording every single syllable. "I am sorry," Arthur choked out, his voice trembling on national television. "I was wrong. I had no right to destroy your gates. I had no right to disrespect your husband. I am truly sorry." Big John stared at him for one long, final moment. Then, the club president turned his back on the billionaire. He looked down the winding mountain pass, facing his massive, silent army. Big John raised his right hand high into the air and made one sharp, forward motion. 1,000 hands reached for 1,000 ignition switches. The sound that followed was not just a roar, it was a physical force. It was the sound of a sleeping giant, fully awakening. 1,000 heavy engines fired up in a massive, rolling cascade that shook the concrete pillars of the resort and echoed across the deep mountain valleys for miles. It was the sound of absolute victory. The formation rolled forward. They did not speed. They did not peel out. They moved in perfect, staggered columns, slowly dispersing onto the open highway, heading back down the mountain toward their respective states and charters. The charity ride was officially over. They left as peacefully and legally as they had arrived, leaving behind a billionaire who would never, ever forget the day they came. The aftermath was swift and entirely unforgiving. Within exactly 48 hours, the board of directors at Vance Global Resorts held an emergency meeting. Under immense pressure from investors and facing a total collapse of public relations, Arthur Vance was unanimously fired from his own company. The local politicians who had taken his bribes panicked and immediately reversed all the fines and fake zoning violations against the sanctuary to save their own careers. The massive luxury resort sat empty, plagued by lawsuits and financial ruin, eventually being sold off in pieces. And in the quiet valley of Oakhaven, life slowly returned to normal. On a cool Tuesday evening, Emma walked up to the front boundary of the Ironheart Sanctuary. A team of local volunteers, inspired by the national news broadcast, had spent the entire weekend building a brand new, massive oak gate. It was stronger and more beautiful than the old one. Emma smiled. She reached out and polished the heavy bronze plaque that was now bolted firmly to the center of the new wood. The winged skull gleamed perfectly in the fading sunlight. Behind her, the rescue dogs barked playfully in the yard, and the retired police horses grazed peacefully in the tall green grass. Some people spend their entire lives believing that power belongs to the people who write the checks, sit in the high offices, and wear the expensive suits. Arthur Vance believed that too, right up until the moment he was forced to drop to his knees on the asphalt, cleaning a memorial with his silk tie, handing it back to a young widow he had tried to break. True power is not about forcing people to fear your wealth. True power is about respect, dignity, and a brotherhood that refuses to let the legacy of a good man be forgotten. Emma always knew that, and thanks to 1,000 men on motorcycles, the rest of the world finally understood it too. Thank you for listening to this incredible journey on Heart Tales. If this story moved you, if you believe in the power of loyalty and standing up for those who cannot stand up for themselves, hit that subscribe button, drop a comment below, and tell us what you would have done if you were in Emma's shoes. We read every single one. Stay strong, protect your legacy, and we will see you in the next story.